When reviewing a game, the reviewer considers everything both within and around the game, when it was released, in what console, what genre, and if it's a sequel, how the new entry evolved the franchise. This last statement, however, causes a dilemma. If you didn't play all games in said franchise, how do you review it? How does not playing the previous game affect one's judgment? One thing at a time. Roll the intro. Reviews are always partially personal opinions regarding a game. It is inevitable that the writer's experiences and preferences will influence the final judgment of his or her review. Otherwise, every article in the world would be identical to the other. Yet this sparks the question: to make an objective review, do you need to play all games of a franchise before reviewing the latest entry? How does playing the previous title of the reviewed game affect the opinion shared? The answer to these questions may be obvious at first. Of course you need to play, let's say, Portal 1 to review Portal 2. How else would you notice the changes between the two games? And that seems fair enough, but the more you think about them and the less obvious these answers are. A game should be playable regardless of any title in the franchise. Otherwise, how is it possible that The Witcher 3 and Zelda Breath of the Wild are the best sellers of their own franchise if these are the latest entries? There would be no incentive to make sequels if they sold categorically less. Furthermore, how far does one player need to go before they're allowed to review a game? Do I need to play the first Civilization before reviewing Civilization 6? Do I need to play 10 Dragon Quest games before reviewing Dragon Quest 11? Do I need to play like 30 different driving and football games before talking about the latest Formula 1 or FIFA? As you can imagine, the more examples I bring to the table and the more confusing the answer becomes. Surely somebody does not need to play hundreds of hours of retro games just to claim if the new entries are right or not, but at the same time it would feel almost guilty to review a game of an untouched series. Can I really ignore all franchise improvements made in the time and take the latest game as a starting point? Let me make one more example. When I made my review about the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe, I made countless reference to the first title, and the game itself is clearly made as a gift for older fans like myself. So would a review of the game feel less genuine if I have not played the 2013 edition first? The dilemma persists, and there will be never just one answer to untangle this mess. However, there are many considerations that I wish to share with you in this video to quote-unquote answer the question on the title. How do we review a video game sequel? What scenarios does it make sense to play the original title before the new one, and how to approach reviewing a sequel with or without having played the previous iteration? Let's find out. Without beating around the bush, I will confirm that yes, it is possible to review a video game sequel without playing a single title from the franchise. It would be absurd to expect reviewers to have played 30 years of a video game franchise just to share their own take on the latest entry. However, the context of a reviewer should not be a secret for the listener. If a reviewer is unfamiliar with the topic in hand, it is perfectly acceptable to come clean and state that the title being reviewed is the first one he or she played from the franchise. Not declaring this would cause unnecessary confusion and drama. Having said that, the preface of the question on the thumbnail is not "is it possible?" but rather how. How do you review a video game sequel? There are of course two scenarios to consider. The scenario where you played the previous title of a given franchise and the one where you didn't. Starting with the former, I think it should be fairly obvious to say that the improvements and shortcomings of the latest entries are important to be weighted, especially when the target audience of your review are fans of the franchise. If I were to review Assassin's Creed Origins, I would make it very clear that, being a fan of the franchise, the changes made in the formula don't work well with the established series. I think it is silly to limit the player's skills by introducing RPG elements with what should be an action-adventure game. How does one blade at the heart and 10 arrows to the face not kill a man is beyond my comprehension. A reviewer should not only base all positive and negatives of a game solely by comparing them to the previous title. The Witcher 2 sold 2 million copies, meaning that about 95% of people who bought the third game did not play the second one, let alone the first one. What would be the point of a person who is looking to buy The Witcher 3 to know how the saga improved with time? I did not mention this explicitly, but of course not all sequels are created equally. Games that have sequels every year require more reflections regarding what changed than sequels that are released in different generations of consoles. But what if this is your first game of the series? What if you didn't play all previous iterations before reviewing a game? In this second scenario, while it is still possible to make a review, the rules slightly change. For the sake of making examples, let's say that Sonic Forces is my first Sonic game, and I wish to review it. Sonic Forces is just like American Pizza, a profound disappointment. Yet, if this would have been my first Sonic game, I would have not had many references to work with. Sure, the mediocrity of the game would have been clear to anyone, but it would have been hard for a non-Sonic fan to explain what could have been improved. How do you review it? A newcomer's review to a franchise is not only valuable, but it could also be more useful for a non-fan to know how it feels like for a newcomer to pick up a game. When writing the reviewer should yes do some research, but most importantly share the impact he or she has when playing the game fresh, like some of the people who are reading to the review. A reviewer has to make explicit what are the pros and cons of playing a sequel, without touching the rest of the franchise. Going back to the example of Assassin's Creed Origins, a fan could not appreciate the new changes, but these new changes are not bad per se. I would say that a non-fan could look at the game with less prejudice and perhaps appreciate the game more for it. So how does a reviewer who never played an Assassin's Creed tackle this game? By comparing it to other similar titles and extrapolating the good, the bad and the ugly based on what it surrounds the game, not what came before. Ideally, the best sequel is a game that can stand alone and welcome newcomers with the utmost ease. A non-fan is the perfect person to judge whether or not the reviewed sequel does a good job at bringing new audiences. Of course, I would still recommend not to review games outside your comfort zone. There would be little point in reviewing a horror game if you're not into them, but you should not feel limited by the lack of experience when sharing and describing your opinion. There is no set of rules when it comes to reviews, because, as stated earlier, it is the diversity of people who review that give the public different point of views, resulting in a more complete image. The methods I gave are the methodology to reach the end goal, but not the end goal itself, because that one will come naturally when reviewing a sequel, no matter the starting point. Of course, if you're planning to make a professional review for an established publication, the safest option would be to have some familiarity with the franchise you're reviewing. Even if the impact of the previous titles is minimal, in a professional setting, leaving details behind could enrage fans of the series in hand. If you wish to share your personal take on a video game without trying to be as objective as possible, just like I do in my YouTube channel for instance, it is more than possible to review a video game sequel from scratch, and I hope that in today's video, I taught you how. If you made it this far, I want to thank you one too many sequels times for watching today's video. As you may have noticed, I have done my fair share of reviews in this channel, and the topic of how to make reviews is one that I found fascinating. What's your take on sequel reviews? How much playing the previous title affects one's judgment when addressing the new entry? Let me know down in the comments and I wish you a wonderful day. Arrivederci!